Let's be honest, when you think of D-Day, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's that opening scene from Saving Private Ryan, right? Men storming the beaches, absolute chaos, incredible bravery. And that is a huge part of the story. But behind all of that was an even bigger, hidden story. The absolutely mind-boggling logistical puzzle of how you move an entire army across an ocean and onto a hostile shore. This was the largest amphibious invasion in the history of the world, and it came incredibly close to failing. So let's get into the secret story of how they pulled it off. I mean, just listen to these words from General Eisenhower on June 6, 1944. He sets the stage perfectly. This wasn't just another battle plan. He called it a Great Crusade. The framing was epic, a monumental effort to free an entire continent. And the scale of that effort, well, it was almost impossible to wrap your head around. To even get this crusade started, the Allies first had to ship a staggering amount of stuff to Great Britain. We're talking 5.9 times million tons of cargo. That's not just soldiers. That's tanks, fuel, bullets, beans, boots, literally everything you'd need to build a massive invasion force from the ground up, all on one island. And that really brings us to the core question here. Look, it's one thing to have the soldiers and all the gear, but it's a completely different problem to get all of that across the treacherous English Channel, land it on a heavily fortified beach, and then keep it all supplied. The what of D-Day is famous. We're going to dig into the how. The problem they were facing was just immense. They have to land on a hostile shore, defended by what Hitler called his Atlantic Wall. And this wasn't just a few bunkers here and there. No. This was a 2,400-mile-long nightmare of concrete fortresses, massive gun emplacements, millions of landmines, and all sorts of nasty beach obstacles, designed to do one thing: smash any invasion and throw it right back into the sea. So, to crack that wall, the Allies had to build a machine. An invasion machine big enough, powerful enough, and complicated enough to get the job done. And this wasn't something they whipped up in a few months. This was a slow, painstaking 2-year effort to turn the entire island of Great Britain into the biggest military launch pad the world had ever seen. And that buildup had a code name: Operation Bolero. Starting way back in early 1942, over 1.5 million American troops began pouring into the UK, along with all their stuff. Now, think about this. The entire UK is smaller than the state of Oregon, and suddenly it had to find space for and support an entire American army. We're talking 120 to 150 ships docking every single month. But having all the gear in the world doesn't mean a thing if you can't get people to work together. And that was one of the first huge hurdles. The command structure was frankly a mess. In April 1943, they created this group called COSAC, but the planning was totally fractured. The British and American teams were basically working separately. American officers constantly had to phone home to Washington for permission, which caused these massive delays. It actually took until January of 1944, just months before the invasion, to finally create a single unified command, SHAEF, with Eisenhower in charge. A lot of precious time was lost. And even with a unified command, the organization was, well, it was a bureaucratic maze. To try and manage all this complexity, the planners created this web of committees with all sorts of acronyms. You had BUCO, the Build-Up Control Organization, which made the load plans. Then you had MOVCO to actually do the plans, and TURCO to manage how fast ships could get in and out of port. It was alphabet soup, and it was confusing. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Rear Admiral Alan Kirk, one of the key American commanders, was so fed up, he wrote this in his official report. He's basically saying nobody knew who was in charge. Committees were doing the same job. No one knew who had the final say. And they weren't even keeping good records. It was organized chaos before a single shot had even been fired. The Allies were fighting their own bureaucracy just as much as they were getting ready to fight the enemy. But somehow, out of all that chaos came a plan. A plan of such incredible detail and, frankly, brilliant thinking. See, the planners knew they couldn't just sail up and capture a big port like Cherbourg. The Germans would obviously destroy it before they could use it. So they had to solve an impossible problem. How do you supply a massive army over open, unprotected beaches? And their solution? It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. The Mulberry Harbors. The thinking was, if we don't have a port, fine, we'll bring our own. The plan was to literally build 2 gigantic artificial harbors in Britain, tow them across the English Channel in pieces, and then assemble them right off the coast of Normandy. The whole point was to create calm water so they could unload ships 24/7 no matter what the weather was doing.
I mean, just think about how you would even do that. First, they'd sail a bunch of old, worn-out ships over and sink them in a line. Those were the gooseberries, to make an initial breakwater. Then came the really heavy lifting. They towed over and sank 146 enormous, hollow concrete boxes called phoenixes. Some of these things weighed over 6,000 tons apiece. They formed the main harbor walls. And finally, they connected floating piers and roadways from the new harbor all the way to the beach. It was a straight-up engineering miracle. And the insane level of detail didn't stop there. They came up with PLUTO, a pipeline under the ocean, to pump fuel directly from England to France. The final operational plan itself was over 1,000 pages long, a binder 3 inches thick. It spelled out a rigid 3-day timetable for every single one of the 4,000 ships involved. And to top it all off, the top naval commander issued a direct order. After May 12th, nobody touches this plan. No amendments. It was locked in, set in stone. A plan for absolutely everything.
But you know the old saying, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy. Or in this case, no plan survives contact with the friction, the fog, and the sheer bloody chaos of war. This is the moment when that perfect 1,000-page plan slammed head-on into the messy reality of the Normandy beaches. So you have this massive collision. On one side, you've got a plan that tried to choreograph every single soldier, every single bullet. And on the other side, you have what military folks call the friction of war, that messy, unpredictable reality where if something can go wrong, it probably will. And the plans started to fall apart almost instantly, especially on Omaha Beach. The plan called for 2,400 tons of supplies to be landed there on D-Day. The reality? Because of the intense German fire and all the wreckage piling up, they only got 100 tons ashore. 100. That's less than 5% of what was planned for. A catastrophic failure right out of the gate. Those rigid timetables, they were shattered within hours. The beaches were pure chaos. Desperate soldiers would climb onto supply ships, grab the specific ammo they needed, and leave the rest, basically turning these vital ships into useless floating dumps. Army and Navy officers were literally arguing on the beach about who was supposed to be in charge. But then, something amazing started to happen. Improvisation. Guys on the ground started breaking the rules to save the day. Against strict orders, ship commanders started running their big LST landing ships right up onto the sand. They used amphibious trucks called dukas to ferry cargo when there weren't enough ferries. It was initiative, not the plan, that started to pull order out of the chaos. So things are a mess, but they're starting to figure it out. The beachheads are secure, the first Mulberry Harbor is just starting to work, and then disaster. An unforecasted gale, the worst storm to hit the English Channel in 40 years, slammed right into the Allied fleet. For 3 straight days, everything just stopped. The impact of that storm was devastating. It completely destroyed the American Mulberry Harbor. That incredible piece of engineering was just gone, ripped to shreds by the waves. The result was a crippling supply crisis. The Army was now short 105,000 tons of supplies and 20,000 vehicles. The Great Crusade was in real danger of grinding to a halt, starving for the fuel and ammo it needed to push inland. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The invasion did succeed, obviously. But it didn't succeed because the plan was perfect. Far from it. It succeeded because of a combination of that brilliant, massive-scale planning and incredible on-the-ground, think-on-your-feet improvisation. And it offers some timeless lessons for managing any hugely complex project. The analysis of this whole operation, codenamed Neptune, really boils down to 4 key lessons that are just as true today as they were in 1944. First, logistics can't be an afterthought. You have to bake it into the plan from day one. Second, you have got to set up a clear, unified chain of command early, or you'll get bogged down in bureaucracy. Third, the friction of war is real. It's inevitable, which means simple, flexible plans are always better than super complex, rigid ones. And maybe the most important lesson of all, you have to empower the people on the ground. Trust them to improvise, because they're the ones who will have to adapt when the plan, inevitably, breaks down. And to really understand the weight of it all, just listen to this. In the final tense hours before the launch, Eisenhower scribbled this note down and tucked it into his wallet. It was the press release he was going to issue if the landings failed. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. It's just a stark, sobering reminder of the unbelievable stakes and the crushing burden of command. Success was never guaranteed. The Great Crusade was balanced on a knife's edge, caught between a meticulous plan for everything and the raw courage to improvise when everything went wrong.